We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. Uh-oh, thrift diving.
Hey, what's up? It's Serena Pia from ThriftDiving.com, which is a do-it-yourself blog, YouTube channel, and podcast that helps you decorate, improve, and maintain your home with paint, power tools, and thrift stores without sacrificing your budget, the environment, or style. Welcome to episode 108 of the Thrift Diving Podcast. And today we are going to talk about how to stop getting frustrated with DIY projects that just take too long. This is something that I think we can all identify with. In fact, this was my week. Remember, I told you I was working on these vintage metal cabinets that I picked up from a online auction, and what I thought was going to take probably just a few days ended up taking probably about 3 weeks. I'm not kidding you. Now, there were some other things that had come up. Remember, I did a photo shoot, and that pretty much took up my entire week. I didn't have the mental capacity to even work on anything outside of just working on that project. But I wanted to actually talk about some of the things that went wrong during that project, which I did talk a little bit about in the video. If you saw the YouTube video that I just posted this week on how the cabinets turned out, you have to see it. They look gorgeous. But this podcast, I want to talk about some actual questions that we can ask ourselves when we're getting started on a DIY project. And I'm going to focus this more so on upcycling furniture, taking something that looks pretty horrific, which is a lot of pieces that we find either at the thrift store, roadside, online auction. Most of them, well, at least for me, tend to be very ugly. I love ugly furniture. The uglier, the better, because it just makes for a really fun project. But it also can make for a very frustrating project, especially if you don't plan properly. And I know that we talked about planning your projects from step 1 to step 2 in a previous episode, and I will leave that episode down below if you want to listen to it. But the project this week really got me thinking about the questions that we have to ask ourselves so that we can come up with a more realistic time frame of how long it takes to actually refinish or upcycle a piece of furniture. Creating this roadmap of what you're going to do before you even do it. Now, the caveat to that is sometimes you don't even know what you want to do, right? Has this ever happened to you? You get started on refinishing a piece of furniture. Maybe you had an idea in your mind of what you were going to do, but sometimes your best ideas didn't happen until you actually got started with creating. And I tell people, this happens often. This is the creative process, right? As you're working on something, ideas will come to you. You'll be inspired by maybe the shape of something, or you'll think, oh, that's right, I've got that pretty paper that I forgot that I bought last year. Let's see how that looks on maybe the side or the drawers. And so you get ideas as you start working on projects, and that's what's supposed to happen. That's the creative process. But there's probably some planning that we could do before we jump into a project that hopefully will cut down on the frustration. And we're going to go through what some of these things are that you should be thinking about. And the reason why I'm able to think through this is because these cabinets took a lot longer than what they needed to, because I didn't actually go through this process. And I know what this process is. I've been refinishing furniture, probably for the last 13 years. So it's not like I just started a year ago, a week ago, a month ago. I've been at this for a while. And if I can make these mistakes, I know that you listening to this, who might be a newbie, maybe you've got some experience, maybe you've got 5 years of experience. If I'm going through these problems, I can guarantee that you're probably experiencing some of these as well. So we're going to talk about what are some of the questions that you should ask yourself before you even start on this project, and how do you create a good roadmap for how you're going to finish this piece so that you're not just spinning your wheels and spending more money, getting frustrated, and not really enjoying the process. Okay, so let's think about some of these things. I think a good starting place is to think about who you are as a person, right? What are your personal preferences? And are you choosing projects that are projects that you should be working on, right? Like if you're somebody who is choosing a project that is going to take a long time because there's a lot of damage to this piece of furniture, but you tend to be a perfectionist. And so you want everything to be just right. Well, that means you're probably going to be putting a lot of time into this project because there's a lot of damage. There's a lot of dirt. So not only are you going to be doing a lot of cleaning, but you're going to be doing a lot of repairs. And that could actually, that could fuel you. You really could enjoy those types of projects, especially if you've got experience and you know, okay, I like really ugly projects. I like projects that have to have a lot of things repaired. I like to, test my ability to fix things, maybe problems I'd never come across. If you know that that's the kind of person that you are, and those are the kind of projects that you like, then great. But if you're a newbie, these are some questions that you might want to ask yourself, because if you are somebody who is a perfectionist, you might not want to go and or let's say you're a perfectionist and you don't really have a lot of patience for things taking a long time, but yet maybe you're drawn to a certain type of project, right? You've been seeing some things out on the blogosphere, on Instagram, Pinterest, and you're kind of falling into this, jumping on the bandwagon of people finding ugly furniture. But because of your style, your personality, it doesn't really work well with the kind of person that you are. You're a perfectionist. You're someone who gets very impatient if something takes a long time. So maybe those trends of finding things that are really ugly and require a lot of work, maybe that's not going to work for you. So you might want to find something that has light damage or maybe no damage. Maybe you're the kind of person who you're a perfectionist and you just want to get in there and do a couple coats, and you know that it's not going to require you to do a lot more work. So I think it really just depends on who you are as a person and the challenges that you like, and whether your frustration level is pretty low, if you've got a high threshold for, working on long extended projects, because you might be someone that says, I only want to do a project that's going to take me a day or less, or 3 hours or less. I don't really have a lot of time to work on projects. Or you might be someone who says, I'm okay with doing extended projects. I can do a couple of weekends, even if it takes me a month. I love just having that one project to kind of sink my teeth into, and I don't care how long it takes me. I think you really have to get to know who you are as a person before you start acquiring a lot of projects that don't really fit with your personality. So I think that's the first thing that you can do, is to know yourself. Know thyself, right? Know thyself. Who said that? Was it, oh gosh, I should know this. Was it Shakespeare? I feel like it was Shakespeare. Anyway, know who you are as a person, know the kind of projects that fuel you and the kind of projects that frustrate you. And also, do you do projects for yourself only? Or are you someone who sells projects, that sells your finished pieces? Those are probably going to take a lot more time than maybe a project you're just doing for yourself and you're okay with skipping certain steps, right? Or maybe leaving the back of furniture unpainted. If I was selling a piece of furniture, by the way, I would never leave the back unpainted. I would never leave the bottom unpainted. Everything would get paint, because I would not want someone loading up something that I created into their vehicle and it looks beautiful on the outside, but the minute they lift it up, there's an unpainted surface down below. Like for me, I think that would be very embarrassing. So you should ask yourself, are these projects that you're doing for yourself that you don't really care if it's painted in the back or down below? And if that's the case, then you might be taking less time doing a project because you can skip corners and skip steps. Or cut corners. That's what I'm looking for. You could cut corners, or you can skip steps and save some of that frustration because it wouldn't take as long. So really just get to know who you are. If you're a newbie, get to know who you are and pick projects that fit with your personality and with what you're planning to do with that furniture. And if you're someone who's been doing furniture for a while, like me, of course, you'll know what projects you like. And for me personally, I do like projects that are ugly. But with these cabinets, these metal cabinets that I had sitting in my shed not in my shed, they were in my garage and I brought them into the shed, but they were in my garage for a little over 2 years. And just recently, in the last several weeks, I pulled them into the garage, God, I keep getting the garage and shed mixed up. I pulled them into the shed to work on them. And as I mentioned, what I thought was going to take 3 or 4 days, a week max, took even longer. It was like 3 weeks. And the reason why is because there was just so many steps that I did out of order. And because I did things out of order, I ended up messing up the previous step. So this leads me to the next step, really, to think about your projects while you're creating this roadmap is you really have to properly assess the furniture. And I think that's where I failed. I looked at it and I said, I knew there's rust. I could see the rust. It was maybe like medium. In fact, I even did a podcast episode on removing rust. And you can find that link down below. And I really thought that that was the main thing that I was going to have to do for this. So when I jumped into it, I really didn't do a proper assessment of everything that I was going to have to do for this project. And as I mentioned, and you'll see in the video, if you watch the video down below in the YouTube link, I literally kept doing steps and then having to go back 2 steps because I didn't properly assess, oh, that's right, I need to fill these holes first. Or I should have removed the rust and then filled the holes and then primed. But you'll see in the video, I actually primed and then said, oh, wait a minute. I think I want to fill these holes. And because the reason why is these cabinets, and they were really, really old. They were probably from like the 50s or 60s, maybe even earlier. I don't even know. I would say 60s. And they were missing lock sets on the drawers. Each cabinet had, was it 6 drawers? Yeah, 6 drawers. And they were missing the lock sets. So there was these big ugly holes, and then it had existing hardware. So I took off the existing hardware and realized only later that I needed to fill those holes and that I could use pretty knobs. And I had just a collection of knobs that were very whimsical, and I thought they were beautiful. And I felt like, couldn't speak. I felt like I could use these knobs to hide these lock set holes, and had to be a little creative with how to get those to actually be attached. But I didn't think about this from step 1 to step 2. So when you're properly assessing the furniture, there are some questions that you should ask yourself, and these are the questions that I should have asked. So for example, you want to ask yourself, is there anything unsightly that needs to be covered up? How do you feel about leaving the bottoms of furniture unpainted? I mentioned this a couple of minutes ago. When I first started, I'm somebody that didn't mind leaving the back unpainted or the bottom unpainted. And as I moved on in my journey of furniture painting, to me it felt, I don't know, like it was just unfinished. So that's how I feel about projects and leaving things unpainted. And when I was working on these metal cabinets, I didn't realize I was going to feel so strongly about leaving the underside of the drawers unpainted. So I had already gotten to the point where the drawers had already been painted. I was already putting the wallpaper inside of the drawer, and I was about to attach the removable wallpaper to the sides. And I thought, wait a minute, these drawers, I know nobody's going to see them, but I really don't want to leave them unpainted. So then I ended up having to go back and repaint them. Whereas if I had planned properly, when I realized that I was going to paint the interior of those drawers, I would have done the exterior as well. I would have just did it in one pass and not have to go back and recreate like the setup with the paint and the spray paint. It was just too much. So you have to ask yourself, with the furniture that you're making over, is there something that's unsightly that needs to be covered up? Do you want to paint the bottoms of the furniture? Do you want to paint the inside? Now, when I'm thinking of a dresser, nobody, for the most part, is painting the interior of a dresser. These are parts that, literally nobody's going to see them. It's hidden behind the drawers. But, there might be some parts that you can see. And do you feel like you want to paint that? Or is it okay to leave it unpainted? This is up to you. You have to make this decision ahead of time, because then that way you can plan for doing it early on and not have to go back and possibly mess up your finish that you've already painted on the outside. All right. So The other thing that you need to assess is, does the furniture rock back and forth? What tools or materials are you going to need to fix that? Is it something that's even fixable? Thankfully, with these cabinets, there wasn't any rocking. They're pretty steady cabinets, but whatever furniture you're refinishing, you might have a rocking back and forth. And so you might just have to tighten that up, or maybe it's not something that's easily fixable. When you look closer, maybe that leg is actually broken. And to repair that, it is probably going to be a lot more work than you really want to invest. So maybe that's not the piece of furniture for you. And you want to look to see if there's any dents that have to be filled or anything that has to be sanded beforehand. And this is something that I didn't plan for as well, because these cabinets, because they were so old from like the 60s, it looks like there had been attachments that were on the metal furniture over the years. Maybe they just, I don't know, somebody took them apart. And so there were holes that were like holes where hardware was going into, but there were some holes that looked like somebody had actually just punctured the side of these cabinets. And I don't know why I didn't notice that first, because it was already, like I'd already put primer on this cabinet and saw those holes, and I thought, and they were dented in, and I thought, oh gosh, I'm going to have to figure out how to fill that. And the patch job that I did, you'll hear more about that in a moment with the product that I used, but the patch job that I used for that, or the product that I used, I don't know if I really did a great job. I feel like I could have done a better job if I'd planned for that. So ask yourself, are there any dents that have to be filled, or any gouges that you might want to fill with wood filler if it's a wood product or a wood project? That's what you'll need to take care of before you do any priming or before you do any painting. You don't want to have to go back and do that. And you might want to ask yourself if there's anything that you want to change. And this is something that, again, I should have had the foresight to see. I knew that I needed to fill those lock set holes, but at the time I didn't know that I was going to put knobs in there and create wooden washers to hold those knobs in place. So I'd removed the handles, but I didn't realize that I needed to fill those holes until later. But if I had asked myself, okay, is this something I want to change? Do I want to use this existing hardware? Then maybe I could have answered that question sooner and have done those steps much sooner in the process. But you also want to ask yourself, do you want to make this shorter or taller? That's something important, because if you are going to make this shorter, then that's probably going to involve power tools. Now, not metal cabinets, but if you have a wood piece of furniture, you might want to cut the legs, and you want to do all that before you start either priming, painting, and you just want to do those things as early as you can. But also look at the finish. If this is something that you're painting, if you've got a dark color, you're not going to want to put a light paint on a dark piece of furniture without priming it first. And this is why. That dark color is going to come through and it's going to be so dark, you're going to probably have to do 3 or 4 coats of light paint to just cover it up. Seriously. So, a lot of times when people say, or companies will tell you, oh, you don't have to prime before you paint furniture. Well, that's generally true, but there are some caveats. And that one caveat, well, there's a couple caveats, but that one caveat about the original color of the wood, that's significant because that dark wood is going to show through. So this is a question that you want to ask yourself as you're moving forward in refinishing furniture. If that color of the existing wood is dark, you're going to need to prime first. So just imagine the frustration level that you would experience if you go to paint this dark piece of furniture and you've already gotten 3 coats on and it still looks not very good. That's frustrating, especially if you're a newbie, because you're going to feel like you did something wrong. And it's just because you didn't know that you need to do some primer on that. Because once you put primer, then you would probably just do 2 coats for good coverage, and then that's it. And it's going to look fantastic. So again, this is something to think about if you want to change. Now, if you're actually painting this dark piece of wood furniture with a color that's dark, you're not really going to have to prime as long as it's in good condition. you can just do your 2 coats and there's no problem. It's just if you're going lighter, then you want to do that primer so that you don't waste your really good, expensive furniture paint. Okay, another thing that you might want to change, you might want to add wheels. And if you are going to add wheels, what's that look like? How are you going to attach those? And if you're adding wheels, maybe you don't have to make something as short or as tall. Think about the height that those wheels are going to add to your piece of furniture and figure out how much you'll actually need to either take off or add to your furniture. So these are the kind of things that you start planning for. And when you do that, the goal, the goal, doesn't mean it always happens, is that you will plan for these things and your project will go so much more smoothly. But again, remember, you may get inspiration while you're working on something. So, don't feel that you have to have everything figured out before you get started. I would much rather you get started on your furniture piece and then later come up with all these things than to get stuck in this loop of like planning and research and planning and research. That can actually that can prevent you from moving forward. I've seen people do this a lot, and I've done it myself, especially with projects that I've not been very comfortable with knowing how to do, right? Like when I was building my walk-in closet, I didn't know how to build closet organizers. I didn't know how to do that. So I took a lot of time planning. I used SketchUp, and it ended up working out very well to my favor that I took a lot of time to plan. But again, it took it took so much time, but it was worth it to add that time for planning. But don't get stuck in that loop where you're afraid to even make a move because you don't know what exactly you want to do. You don't have it all figured out. So there's a little bit of balance there you have to work out. The next thing that you really have to ask yourself is, what materials do I need? I just mentioned about primer. Do you need primer? Do you need wood filler? Do you need metal filler if you're working on metal cabinets or some sort of metal project? So those are the things that you want to start noting. And if you are not subscribed to my blog, then you'll want to subscribe, because one of the free printables that I give you is a materials checklist. And this is basically, what I tried to do was think of all the possible materials that you would need for any project. I should say common materials, because you can't possibly plan for every material that you'll need for every project. But things like decoupage, nails, screws, paintbrushes, those kind of things. And that document is yours if you're not a subscriber. Now, if you are a subscriber and you want that document, email me and I will send it to you so that you can plan your projects a little easier, especially if you're a newbie, because sometimes you're just not even sure what you need. And you might see something on that list and you think, oh yeah, I guess I really should get that for my DIY toolbox. So you can use a list like this for your materials and just note what it is that you need. You might already have some things on hand and you may have to buy some things. But the thing is, and this is a problem that I'd run into, if you have paint that you're already going to use, or that you already have that you are going to use for your project, you really have to ask yourself, do I have enough paint? This is the problem that I ran into with these cabinets. I am trying to be more resourceful. I mentioned to you in a recent podcast that I have spent so much money in 2022 on materials, supplies, whether for thrift diving or whether for personal, like fingernail polishes. I bought a lot of stuff and I didn't realize how much I was spending. And I think you can probably identify with this. When you're buying materials for a DIY project, sometimes you really don't know what it is that you need. Again, if it's a project you've never done before, even if you're following someone's blog post and you're trying to replicate something that they've done that you want to do, you may not know exactly what you need. Or if you want color A versus color B, and sometimes you end up buying both just because you don't want to be in the middle of a project and try color A and decide, this isn't really working for me. I think I'm going to go with color B. And it's nice to have that on hand so that you don't have to run back to the store or reorder it. But what happens is that you end up having a lot of supplies just sitting around that you thought you were going to use, but you didn't really use. Or maybe you only used half of it. And what I've been trying to do for 2023 is to use some of these materials that I already have on hand. So when it was time to paint these cabinets, I did ask people on Instagram, hey, what do you think I should paint these cabinets with? What color do you like? And a lot of people said, oh, you should do red. Well, I went to my stash and I found that I had a cranberry color. I did tell you that recently in another episode that I was going to go with cranberry. Well, that was all well and good until I went to use the paint and again got myself into this issue of, oh, wait a minute. I'm doing things backwards. I just put on 2 coats of paint, but now I've got to plug these holes. So I've got to reprime these areas and then repaint. And I ended up just using a lot more paint than what I thought I was going to need. And I ran out before I was able to finish the other cabinet. But that actually worked to my benefit because the color that I ended up going back to the store, I had to go to the store at 8:00 at night and I was going to do a color match. But when I went to look at the paint chips, there was a color that was very similar that drew my eye. It was by Behr called Sugar Beet. This color, let me tell you, this color is so beautiful. It looks very vibrant pink when you open the can. Of course, that's true of any paint. It's going to look more vibrant in the can, but it dries darker. And it's just the most beautiful shade of like deep berry pink. And I don't even think that it's like a girly pink. Like it's something that I think anybody could enjoy personally. So it worked to my favor. But if you have a stash of paints that you're trying to draw from and reuse materials that you already have to keep your costs low and just be more economical, really ask yourself if that's enough paint. And I can't even tell you how much paint you need for your project because it's going to depend on how many coats you use. It's going to depend on the size of your project. So when in doubt, either buy new paint so that you can have enough for that project to actually complete it, or just, I don't know, I don't know. That's the only thing that I can say is if you don't think you're going to have enough paint, then go ahead and buy new paint. If you're concerned about like not having enough paint that you already have on hand, just buy more. And if it's a color that you really like, I can guarantee you'll probably find other things in your home or other pieces of furniture to paint with that color, so it won't be a waste. But, really ask yourself if you have enough of those materials. If you're using decoupage, like Mod Podge, that doesn't take a lot. But again, if you're doing a larger project, you may not have enough on hand and you may need more. So try to order those things and preemptively so that you're not in the middle of your project on a Saturday at 12 noon and you've run out and now you've got to stop and go to the store or order. That's the frustrating part. And I'll tell you, that is a huge reason why people don't finish projects. Think about your projects that you have left unfinished. Is it because you ran out of a material, or you thought you were going to reorder that thing and you're like, I just got busy with something else, and it's still sitting inside of your like dining room somewhere. So try to get as many pieces of materials that you need, that you think you need, even if you have to buy extra. If it's something that you can take back to Home Depot or Lowe's, then just buy extra, especially when it comes to spray paint, primer, those kinds of things. You go through a lot more primer than what you realize. So always buy extra and you can always return that, even without a receipt. If you go to Home Depot and you don't have your receipt, but you have the card that you used to purchase it, that's all they need. So you can return those and, you don't have to stack up all those materials in your garage. Okay. Another question to ask yourself is, how expensive will this project be? And again, sometimes you're not sure how much money you're going to spend, but you might be able to get a pretty good idea. For example, if you know that you want new knobs, or if you need new knobs and they're all going to match, well, okay, Home Goods might have a set of 4 or 6 knobs, maybe 6. I think they have them for maybe $20. But in this case, these drawers, there were 12 of them. So I would have, if I bought new matching knobs, for $20. That would have been $40 in knobs. So at that point, when you're buying these materials, I probably could have bought new cabinets somewhere for a lot less if I had to buy everything new, right? So just keep a little tally of what you think you're going to have to spend on this. Just do a quick little calculation and see. Now, if this is something that you're selling, this is going to be really important because not only are you putting in the time, but you're buying the primer, you're buying the knobs. All of these things are going to cut into your profit. So you don't want to go there. You want to make sure that this is something that's not going to cost you a lot of money. And that's why for the cabinets that I did, I just used a collection of knobs that I think most of them came from a brand. Like 5 years ago, they sent me little samples here and there. And I didn't use them because none of them matched. This was the first time that I thought, wow, I can use all of these knobs. And that's the look I'm going for. Just something whimsical and fun. And it worked for me. So tally up what you think this is going to cost you. And if it seems like it's going to start being really expensive, then you might not want to do it unless, of course, you have the money and you don't really care. This is the project you want to do. Your heart is set on it. And yeah, you're going to pay whatever you need to get it done because this is what you want to do. That's fine. But just know it could cost you. Just have an idea in mind before you get started. This next step, Step 4, is actually really, really important. Read the instructions for all the materials. Have you read the instructions for what you're going to use in your project? And I say that this is important because when I ran into some problems with this project, these metal cabinets, I don't know if reading the instructions would have helped, but I feel like if I had read the instructions, maybe I would have looked at the fact that you have to have a certain temperature, for example, before you apply a top coat. Now, I know that generally, but sometimes when you're working on projects, you just tend to forget to look at the instructions. Well, let me tell you what happened. The paint, right, this beautiful sugar beet color, it's a flat paint, and I didn't want it to get scuffed up, even though it's like, I think the brand of Behr paint, it said like scuffability or scuffable, so that it can be dinged a little bit and rubbed up against, and it's not going to scuff as much. But I still thought, okay, this would be a great project to add a top coat. Well, I just happened to be passing by a Woodcraft, which I was not Woodcraft, what's the other one? Rockler. And I've never been to a Rockler before, but I was in Virginia last weekend and I saw one and I was so excited. So I went in there and I saw some General Finishes, a new top coat that they have called Dead Flat. They already have one called Flat, but this one's called Dead Flat. You can't even find it on Amazon yet. And I thought, oh, this would be great for this project. Let me pick up a quart of this. Well, I pick up a quart. I did a test just to see how it would look. I liked it. And then I did a test on one of the cabinets on the back because I figured if I didn't like it, it's on the back. Nobody's going to see it. Well, it looked fine. Well, after an hour, it looked fine. What I didn't realize is the very next day, maybe because the air in here was so dry, it started to crack. And thankfully, I had not done the entire cabinets at that point. I had only done the back and I think the side. But I noticed the side, it didn't look good. The side that I used the top coat, it just did not look good. It didn't look, what's the word? Generally when you put on these top coats, they have a milky appearance. And when it dries clear. You can't see it. Well, this particular side did not dry clear. I mean, it was clear, but you could kind of see like a milky film to the coat. And I thought, wow, this is not going very well. And I hadn't gone too far into the project. So at that point, I ended up just applying another coat over top of the sugar beet. So these cabinets got probably about 5 coats of paint, which is insane. But it happens. The other product that I used that I'd never used before was an epoxy putty. Again, remember the holes. Well, we're dealing with metal here. We can't use wood filler in metal. So I went to the Ace Hardware and I said, hey, just, give me what you got to fill metal holes. And he gave me this epoxy putty, and it's like Play-Doh, and you have to kind of roll it around in your fingers to get it well mixed up. And then you can apply it to the holes. And within an hour it sets, and then you can sand it. It didn't really have any instructions, but I should have done a little bit more research maybe on how to apply it, because I felt that I got tripped up a little bit on how to properly remove this, how to easily remove it. And it was true that it was sandable, but it really took a lot of effort until I got smart and said, oh, well, wait a minute, I've got this rotary tool here. Why can't I use this rotary tool to sand down a lot of the bulk? And then I'll follow it up with 150 grit sandpaper. So that worked. But keep in mind, I'd already primed the cabinets at this point. So rubbing this stuff over top of it to fill the holes and then sanding this out with 150 grit sandpaper, I then had to go back over all the cabinets with primer again. You see where I'm talking about, like everything was totally out of order. But anyway, I should have watched some videos on the epoxy putty to see how best to apply it. So that took up a lot of time. The rust dissolver was another product that I used that it worked pretty well. But again, I wanted to look at the instructions and just make sure I knew how to use it. And it told me things like, make sure that you're using a wire brush first to remove the rust flakes, and then apply water to it. So I think the water will help kind of it helps. The water actually would help the rust dissolver to work better. It worked fine without me doing those steps. But again, you want to look at the instructions, because if your rust is heavier, then maybe that actually would have removed more of the rust for your project. So take a little bit of time to look at those instructions. And then the next step, step 5, is kind of related to step 4. Do some tests first. Test as much as you can before you actually start using that product on your project. And, I did test the top coat. However, I didn't let it sit for long enough for me to know whether or not I was really going to like the finish. And typically with a top coat, you would apply the top coat, let it dry, and then you would sand it smooth with, let's say, a 220 grit sandpaper, and then apply another coat. That's typically how I would do it if I was putting top coat on a surface like a wood surface that I'd stained. That's how I would refinish it. But, applying this top coat to the paint, which I generally don't do, I don't know, I didn't test it. I didn't give it enough of a test, in my opinion. I could have left it for longer. I could have tried to sand it smooth. And I think that's why I got bad results. I would have known if I'd given it my all. But I learned it was pretty dry in here, and that's probably why it was cracking, because I have a little hygrometer here in the shed to keep track of just how much moisture is in the air. I've got a dehumidifier in here for when it gets really moist. And the air has been really dry since before the temperature really changed here in Maryland. It's gotten really warm and then wet. So just do as many tests as you can, and that will help to cut down on mistakes. If you can do an inconspicuous test area first, that's great. Do the backside or the underside, and give it some time to show you the results before you just jump into it an hour later, because that's not really testing properly. That'll help save some frustrations and some rework. And the last couple of steps, step number 6, I would say jot down these steps in a quick step-by-step. So now that you've kind of gone through and you've looked at, okay, how did I properly assess the furniture? Is there anything that I need to cover up? Are there repairs I need to do? What am I planning to do with this realistically? Do I want to paint the bottom of the drawers? And then you can actually just jot down a quick step-by-step. And I've done this for other projects. I've done this for example, let's say I'm working on a project for a brand, or I'm doing a video for Home Depot for them to put on their blog. I will actually create a step-by-step, and I'll do a script. They'll actually require me to do a script. And so as I'm working on a script, I usually will be able to tell when something's out of order. I'll say, oh no, I can't say that. I've got to do, B before I do C. I got to change things around. And then I'll actually jot down for my own personal reference some steps. Okay, first I have to do this. I got to go get these supplies and I have to do that. It's so helpful to do that. And I don't know why I don't do that for my own personal projects. I think sometimes for my own personal projects, I just want to jump into it, right? I'm not scripting anything. I am just jumping into it like I did with these cabinets. And then that's when I get into issues. But if you write things down, and here's an example, with, let's say, these metal cabinets. Well, the first thing I have to do is order supplies, right? And you can think of this for your projects. You got to order supplies. Well, where are you going to work on the project? Okay, well, maybe I'm going to work in my dining room or my balcony. So I'm going to set that up and put a tarp on the ground, on the floor, and maybe set some work buckets up here so I can store some materials and tools in them and I don't have to run back and forth to the garage. And, then that you've got to clean the furniture and remove the hardware. And then you've got to fill those holes and cracks with wood filler and get all your sanding done. And then you've got to prime, and you're going to have to prime like 2 coats. So as you start jotting these down just very roughly, it gives you an idea of what you're doing. You've got this roadmap, and it makes you feel like you can tackle this. You feel like now you've got something that you can check off. And this is actually pretty helpful, especially if you're somebody that doesn't have a lot of time to work on projects, because when you've got this step by step, you can say to yourself, okay, well, today's Friday. I know I'm going to start this project like next weekend. So probably by Monday or Tuesday, I need to order these supplies or run to the store on Tuesday so I can get started on Friday night. So you can start putting some actions into play before you even get started so that when you're ready to work on that project on Friday, you've already ordered the supplies. They've already come on Thursday afternoon, right? Like it just makes it feel manageable. And if you know that you don't have a lot of time to work on projects, it's easier for you to work on that project if you know, I can get this done. Yeah, I can order supplies. Yeah, setting up, okay, I'm going to take 30 minutes and just set up my work area today so I can work on it this weekend. It feels like bite-sized tasks versus, oh my gosh, I have to eat this elephant and I don't know where to get started. So that's the joy of jotting things down. And I will tell you, when I work on projects that I just feel really stressed about because I don't know how to do them, just jotting down these quick step-by-steps immediately makes me feel more in control of the project. And I feel like I'm successful. Like I'm already successful just because I know roughly what I'm going to do. So give it a try. Next time you're going to work on a project, create some rough step-by-step task for you to do. And I guarantee that you'll be more likely to want to work on that. And the last step number, I guess this would be step number 7, is to enjoy the process. Guys, enjoy the process. Ask yourself what you like to watch or listen to when you're working on projects. Even though it can be frustrating when you're running out of materials or you hit a snag or you have to rework something, it feels better when you've got something that you're enjoying. I mean, you're enjoying the project, but it feels better when you've got something comforting to listen to and something comforting to watch when you're working on that project. And it becomes less frustrating because it's also a learning process, right? And it's not just trying to hurry up, get to the destination. I want to finish this project. And sometimes those projects are like that, right? Like you've got a time crunch. Maybe you've got family coming to stay with you and you really need to get this guest bedroom done before they come. Yeah, I can understand that. That's an end point or a time point that is really putting you under like a crunch. But for the most part, most of us are doing projects and we're just trying to enjoy the thrill of creating something. And I want us to really focus on that. And I think if we plan things out a little bit more, then it alleviates that frustration and really allows us to focus on the joy of creating. I mean, for anybody who's listening to this, I know that you're a creative person. I mean, I personally think everybody's creative. There's a neighbor of mine who lives down the street. She's not creative in like a DIY sense, but she's creative in the kitchen. And she and I will talk about that. And it's the joy of creating, whether you're making a pot of stew or whether you're doing a piece of furniture. It's that process of putting all the ingredients together, or like if you're making a stew or a pie. But for us, it's the joy of taking paint and power tools and just putting it all together into something that you knew it was going to look great, but you didn't expect it to look as great when you got done. That is so exciting. That process of taking something ugly and making it pretty. I love that. Like these cabinets, oh my gosh, I have to tell you, I was showing my friend a sample of the pictures, and he had made a comment like, these cabinets look like they came from, some weird country somewhere in some dirty bathroom, and it looks like they were storing stool samples in them. I was like, wow, they look that bad. He didn't have the vision for it. Most people don't have the vision for something ugly and turning it into something pretty. I do. I love to do that. And when I'm doing that, I want to focus on enjoying the process. And I want you to focus on that too. And I think if we just take a little bit of time to plan properly, choose the right projects, and know what we're getting into, then we can either like weather the storm when it hits, when we're like, oh shoot, I don't have any paint or no materials. Or we can totally avoid those problems to begin with and just really sit back and enjoy the process. Because for me, when I'm sitting there or standing there working on a project, I'm listening to the Golden Girls. I'm watching the Golden Girls. I mean, I can listen to it because I know all the episodes and even some of the lines. But I'm listening to the Golden Girls, watching the Golden Girls, listening to podcasts, sometimes listening to music. And it's so thrilling. I love it. Absolutely love it. It's like therapy, right? It just makes me happy. And I want you to be happy too when you're working on projects. And so I know, as frustrating as it can be to take longer than expected and then having to do rework, the most important thing is that you enjoy what you're creating and giving yourself a pat on the back when you actually finish it. And hopefully, if we think about these critical questions first, we can, again, reduce that frustration and we can just appreciate more of the joy of creating. All right, that's what I got for you this week. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. I want to know from you. Send me a message, Serena@thriftdiving.com. I want to know from you, are you someone who gets easily frustrated when you're doing projects? Like, how do you manage that frustration? How do you prevent yourself from getting frustrated? Maybe you do. Maybe you never get frustrated with projects and you don't care how long they take. You just enjoy the process. I want to hear from you. What do you think about this episode and this topic of getting the frustration out of our systems and just focusing more on the joy, planning, but just really focusing on the joy? How do you feel about that? Send me a message, Serena@thriftdiving.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram @thriftdiving. I will be back next week with another episode. I hope you have a great weekend, or whatever day it is that you're listening to this. I hope you really enjoy it. And send me some of your pictures of things that you've created too. I would love to see what you're doing behind the scenes. And it feels more like a conversation and less of me just sharing my projects with you. I want you to share your projects with me. Send those pictures to me, before and after. All right, guys, I will talk to you next episode.
Diving. Find it ugly, make it pretty. Paint power tools, alright. Saving money with those thrift store vibes.